Hello, dear friends. Today we continue our journey through the memories of Waffen SS Major General Kurt Meyer. Don't forget to rate the video and leave your opinion about this material. Well, let's begin. Unlike other Soviet cities, there were tall, multi-story buildings on the outskirts of Mariupol. Since there was not a single tree or small house there, the sudden change in scenery was depressing, even oppressive. The advanced units stopped after the first steep climbs and began to advance on foot. I also wanted to jump out of my armored car and use it as a shelter. High walls loomed menacingly over us. I was only distracted from my thoughts when Peter drove into a round square. SS Hauptsturmführer Fritz Bugelsack suddenly appeared to our left. Trams were moving in our direction. Trucks, tractors, horse-drawn carts, and hundreds of people made this large, round square bustling with activity. Our armored car suddenly found itself in front of a fire truck, whose driver stopped it in confusion. Shrapnel from Bugelsack's armored car literally tore the vehicle in half. The machine gun fire from our motorcyclists echoed eerily among the houses behind the square. Enemy soldiers engulfed in flames ran across the square like living torches. Dozens of people were set alight by the explosion of the fire truck's fuel tank. The panicked crowd rushed into the alleys, trampling everything in their path. Barely catching our breath, we continued to move forward and block the streets. We shouted and yelled. The shells from our assault guns began to fall on the crowded streets. The columns of Soviet troops entering the city were broken up. All semblance of order was lost. We, like locusts, swarmed through the streets and tried to find our way to Rostov. The square was littered with smoking debris. Only the seriously wounded or dead soldiers remained. The bulk of the Soviet troops had disappeared. The corner building was turned into a command post from which further combat operations could be directed. Bremer advanced in the direction of Taganrog. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion was in Sartana, 2 kilometers northeast of Mariupol. A large column of enemy troops was retreating eastward along the main road. When we reported the fall of Mariupol, we received the following reply from the division. "This must be a mistake. You must have meant Mangush." However, it was not a mistake. The city was taken by a daring assault by a handful of German grenadiers, whose speed prevailed over the inertia and indecision of the defenders. The success of the day came at the cost of a wounded officer, a non-commissioned officer, and the lives of 4 soldiers who left us forever. The infantry that followed took over the mopping-up operations in the city and established guard posts outside it and further east. We were amazed when we saw the huge Azovstal plant. It stretched for several kilometers along the seashore and was equipped with modern production facilities. The plant fell into our hands intact and undamaged. The battle on the Sea of Azov ended with the fall of Mariupol. In total, more than 100,000 Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner in this battle. 212 tanks and armored vehicles and 672 guns were captured. From October 10th to 12th, the battalion fought in the area between Mariupol and the Muse River, a few kilometers west of Taganrog. At 5 o'clock in the morning on October 12th, the battalion attempted to capture a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Muse and take the bridge across the river with a surprise attack. As we advanced, we came under heavy fire from enemy artillery on the eastern bank of the Muse. The 1st Company of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion was thrown back 700 meters from the bridge and was forced to hold its ground under enemy fire until dark. The main forces of the battalion were able to withdraw from the battle at the Muse without losses, but the advance units were badly battered by Soviet troops. More than 20 soldiers and 5 officers were wounded. Among the wounded were also 2 battalion doctors. At dusk, I took the body of my loyal Peter, SS Untersturmführer Erich Petersill. He was killed by shrapnel. It was the first time a driver had been killed next to me. I could not even imagine that during this war, 7 more of my drivers would be doomed to death. In the gray morning twilight of the dawning new day, we stood at the graves of our fallen comrades. We lowered 4 bodies wrapped in raincoats into foreign soil. My soldiers stood silently at the edge of the grave, saying goodbye to their comrades in arms. The rumble of Soviet heavy artillery firing from Taganrog could be heard, and their shells whistled over our heads, searching for our artillery. The communications unit on motorcycles, Peter's close friends, Visor, and other staff officers waited for my farewell speech. I was overcome with emotion and couldn't utter a word. Tears streamed down my face. A few wildflowers fell into the dark grave. I saluted Peter and turned away. Later, I would write to his mother. The battalion fought to clear the western bank of the Muse River of enemy forces until October 16th. Then followed Witt's battalion, which had secured a position at Kozelkin. On October 17th, during the offensive on Taganrog, our battalion advanced south. Witt's battalion advanced to our left, and Frey's battalion followed to storm the city. Our infantry attacked the northern suburbs of Taganrog with incredible determination and broke into the city. Unfortunately, Frey's battalion came under fire from 2 Soviet armored trains. Their fire tore huge gaps in our battle formations until the armored trains were destroyed by our anti-aircraft guns. More than 80 soldiers were killed by the fire of these steel monsters bristling with numerous barrels. During the assault on Taganrog, we had our first opportunity to observe the organized destruction of the city by Soviet troops. Factories and institutions were blown up, one after another. Thick clouds of smoke marked the retreat of the Soviet troops. When we broke into the city, we saw huge piles of burned grain. In Taganrog, we saw the scorched earth policy in action. Those who fled on ships were sunk by artillery fire. None of the Russians on the shore even thought of rescuing people from the sinking ships. Only on Drescher's orders did they begin to rescue the survivors and bring them ashore. A monument to Peter the Great stood on the steep bank. The Russian emperor, who had fought for access to the southern seas, looked at the sinking ships. It was cold. An icy wind blew from the sea, heralding the imminent onset of winter. To the south, the snow-capped peaks of the greater Caucasus Mountains were visible. The giants sparkled, mesmerizing, untouched by the frenzy of humanity. We were freezing. Our uniforms hung in tatters. We had no winter clothes. Our unit's plan of attack had not yet been thwarted, but a new target had not been identified. A huge territory, truly unoccupied by our troops and without any communication system, lay behind us. The railway lines ran mainly from north to south. For the first time, we thought about defense. Under the cold rain and along the broken roads of October 20th, we moved in the direction of Rostov-on-Don. The main blow was delivered by the 14th Tank Division and the Leibstandarte Motorized Division, which were part of Mackinson's 3rd Motorized Corps. I looked indifferently at the remnants of the Russian battalion on the opposite slope of the hill near Sambek. I could no longer read the map. The letters blurred before my eyes. Weakness and nausea tormented me to such an extent that I had to ask the divisional commander to replace me. 4 months of fighting in Russia were enough to confine me to bed. I was no longer fit for combat. SS Hauptsturmführer Krass took temporary command of the battalion and threw it into extremely heavy fighting. I returned to Taganrog after dark. I was admitted to a field hospital with jaundice and dysentery, accompanied by nausea. At that time, a dysentery epidemic was raging, and it dangerously weakened the front. There were no longer any full-fledged German regiments and divisions. The Eastern Front was held by the weak remnants of once powerful combat units. German Grenadiers were entering the most difficult battle of their existence. They were bloodied and unprepared for it. They saw the impending disaster with wide-open eyes, did their duty, and did not doubt it for a second. They believed in the necessity of self-sacrifice. I left the field hospital after almost 2 weeks. I was still quite weak on my feet, but I reported my arrival to the unit, after which I was unceremoniously transferred by the commander to the officer reserve and was to remain at the division headquarters. By this time, the Leibstandarte division had moved to the defense west of Rostov. It worked closely with the 13th and 14th Panzer divisions and repelled all Soviet attacks. The 3rd Corps' area of operations stretched across bare fields, and the bitter cold had frozen the ground, making it as hard as rock. It was impossible to dig a trench or even set up a decent position. The weather became our most formidable enemy. My battalion took up defensive positions and fought against the 253rd Russian Division under the command of Colonel Okhotsky, which had only been formed in August in the North Caucasus. The division was made up of Kuban Cossacks, who were not particularly fond of Soviet rule. In my absence, the battalion became even weaker. The lack of officers was particularly noticeable. The 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion was commanded by SS Obersturmführer Olbutter. He was wounded, but refused to leave his company. The 3rd Company of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion was struck by a severe outbreak of diphtheria, which further weakened the battalion's combat capability. On November 1st, near the village of Alexandrovsky, SS Obersturmführer von Büttner was wounded. Together with the division commander, I visited my old comrades in Alexandrovsky on November 2nd and attended the presentation of the Knight's Cross to Gerd Bremer. I noted with satisfaction the genuine joy of the motorcyclists at Bremer's award. The company deserved this recognition of its achievements. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon.